The STC commander in Shabwa received the ceasefire notification through the wrong channel, not through Saudi military coordination, not through the coalition command structure that has been managing joint operations since 2015, through a WhatsApp message from a UAE political advisor in Abu Dhabi who had been monitoring the American diplomatic push for the Yemen ceasefire document and who wanted the STC field commanders to know before they heard it from Saudi sources. The WhatsApp message said, "There's a deal on the table. America is pushing it hard. Saudi has not agreed yet. If the deal goes through, your positions will be frozen." The STC commander read the WhatsApp message and made 2 calls, one to his UAE intelligence contact asking for details, one to his deputy telling him to accelerate the movement of specific equipment from forward positions to secondary positions before any freeze could be verified and confirmed. That specific sequence, UAE advisor sending WhatsApp notification to STC commander triggering repositioning before confirmation, is the specific operational detail that tells you everything about how the American Yemen ceasefire document was already being processed on the ground before MBS formally refused it at 3 in the afternoon in Riyadh. The document was dead before the refusal was delivered, not because MBS had decided to refuse it, because the specific network of actors whose interests the document threatened had already begun routing around it before the refusal made the routing official. This is the specific story of why MBS defied Trump on Yemen. Not the diplomatic story of provisions and counter-proposals and 7-minute phone calls. The operational story of a ceasefire document whose defeat was already organized at the field level before it was officially refused at the political level. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how a ceasefire document gets killed before it reaches formal diplomatic rejection, what the WhatsApp message from Abu Dhabi to Shabwa reveals about the UAE's specific interest in the document's defeat, why MBS's refusal served both Saudi and UAE interests in ways that the document's acceptance would have foreclosed, and what the document's operational defeat before formal political defeat tells us about how power is actually exercised in the Yemen conflict. Let us start with the document's operational defeat and why it matters as much as the formal diplomatic refusal. The American ceasefire document for Yemen had 3 provisions that we analyzed in detail in the previous video. Immediate military freeze, 60-day STC transition to government control under joint Saudi-UAE supervision, American guarantee of UAE Idemport commercial interests. Every one of these provisions required STC field compliance to be operationally meaningful. The immediate military freeze provision fails if STC forces reposition equipment, reinforce positions, or change their operational configuration before the freeze can be monitored and verified. An STC that moves specific assets from forward to secondary positions in the window between receiving notification of a potential freeze and the freeze's official confirmation has changed the operational reality that the freeze would formalize. The STC commander in Shabwa, who received the WhatsApp notification and immediately ordered equipment repositioning, was not violating a freeze that had not been officially confirmed. He was ensuring that when and if the freeze was confirmed, the assets he was responsible for were in positions that served STC operational continuity, rather than positions that the freeze would lock in place to Saudi advantage. This repositioning was happening at multiple STC positions across southern Yemen in the hours between the WhatsApp notifications that the UAE's informal network was distributing and the formal Saudi diplomatic refusal that killed the document at 3 in the afternoon. By the time MBS formally refused the document, the specific operational reality on the ground had already been modified in ways that reduced the document's value even if it had been accepted. The UAE's informal notification network is the specific operational intelligence infrastructure that the UAE has been maintaining throughout the conflict to preserve its ability to influence STC operational behavior, even as Saudi Arabia's formal military command authority over the Yemen conflict has been consolidating. Saudi Arabia controls the formal military coordination channels. The UAE controls the informal notification networks that STC field commanders actually trust, because those networks reflect UAE interests in STC operational survival rather than Saudi interest in STC operational subordination. The WhatsApp message from Abu Dhabi to Shabwa is therefore not simply an informal notification. It is the specific operational instrument through which UAE influence over STC behavior persists. Even after Saudi military operations have been systematically reducing STC's formal leverage in the coalition structure. When the UAE wants STC field commanders to take specific actions before formal decisions are made, the informal network is the channel through which that coordination happens. Saudi Arabia knows this channel exists. The specific intelligence that Saudi Arabia has developed about UAE STC informal coordination has been one of the most carefully guarded analytical products in Saudi intelligence throughout the conflict. But knowing the channel exists and being able to prevent it from functioning are different problems. The channel functions through personal relationships and mobile communications, that Saudi Arabia cannot unilaterally interrupt without creating the specific diplomatic confrontation with the UAE that the MBS-MBZ letter framework is designed to manage through bilateral accommodation rather than confrontation. The operational defeat of the American document through UAE informal notification before Saudi formal refusal is therefore the specific illustration of why MBS needed to refuse the document quickly and decisively rather than engaging in the standard diplomatic modification process. A modification process that extended over days would have given the informal UAE STC network more time to operate and would have produced more extensive operational repositioning that reduced the document's value further. The 5-hour refusal from document receipt to formal rejection compressed the specific window in which the informal network's operational effects could accumulate. A refusal delivered at 3 in the afternoon gives the informal network 6 hours of operational window from the morning notification to the formal rejection. A modification process that extends over days gives the informal network days of operational window. MBS chose the 5-hour refusal partly to limit the informal network's window. The 7-minute Trump call confirmed the refusal would not be extended into a modification process. And the specific operational consequence is that the STC repositioning that the informal network triggered happened in a 6-hour window rather than in an extended negotiation window. Now, let us examine why MBS's refusal served both Saudi and UAE interests in ways that are less contradictory than the headline, "Saudi Arabia refused the U.S. deal to finish the UAE in Yemen," suggests. The document's first provision, the immediate military freeze, served neither Saudi nor UAE interests in Yemen in their current operational configuration. Saudi Arabia's air campaign has been advancing Saudi's federalization framework by changing territorial control realities. A freeze locks the current territorial reality. UAE's STC has been repositioning to secondary positions. A freeze locks positions that secondary repositioning may not have finished securing. Both Saudi Arabia and the UAE's STC benefit from continued operational freedom rather than immediate freeze. Saudi benefits because operational freedom continues the air campaign's federalization advancing effects. STC benefits because continued operational freedom allows the repositioning that informal network coordination has been facilitating. The document's second provision, joint Saudi-UAE supervision of the 60-day transition, is the provision where Saudi and UAE interests appear most directly in conflict. Saudi wants Saudi primacy in supervision. UAE wants joint status that reflects bilateral equality. But the specific diplomatic refusal of the American document's joint supervision mechanism does not eliminate the bilateral accommodation of UAE supervision interests that the MBS-MBZ letter framework has already established. MBS's refusal of American-mediated joint supervision does not foreclose bilateral Saudi-UAE supervision arrangements that the letter framework can accommodate on terms that preserve Saudi primacy while giving UAE meaningful participation in the outcome. The refusal is of the American mechanism, not of the substantive accommodation. UAE advisors who sent the informal notifications to STC field commanders understood this distinction. The informal notifications were not telling STC commanders that the UAE was refusing the ceasefire itself. They were telling STC commanders that the specific American document's provisions were potentially adverse and that operational preparation was prudent before the document's fate was determined. The informal notification network's operation in this specific window is therefore not UAE working against Saudi interests by warning STC commanders. It is UAE protecting its operational position in the gap between an American document that may not serve UAE interests and the bilateral Saudi-UAE accommodation that will eventually replace the American document as the operative framework for Yemen governance transition. The document's third provision, American guarantee of UAE Aden commercial interests, is the provision where understanding the Saudi-UAE bilateral framework reveals the most. American guarantee of UAE interests in Aden creates American mediation authority in a commercial arrangement that the Saudi-UAE letter framework has already established should be managed bilaterally. MBS refused the American mechanism. The substantive accommodation of UAE Aden interests is already in the bilateral framework. UAE advisors who sent informal notifications understood that the American guarantee provision was less valuable than it appeared because the bilateral accommodation that the letter framework provides is more durable than an American guarantee whose enforcement depends on continued American mediation authority in a domain where Saudi Arabia is asserting direct management. An American guarantee that Saudi Arabia refuses to cooperate with is an unenforceable guarantee. The bilateral Saudi accommodation that Saudi Arabia has already committed to in the letter framework is enforceable through the personal honor commitment that the letter exchange created. Both the UAE and Saudi Arabia benefit more from the bilateral accommodation than from the American guarantee. MBS's refusal of the document that offered The American guarantee in place of the bilateral accommodation was therefore a refusal that served both countries' interests more than accepting the American mechanism would have served either. This is the specific analysis that explains why MBS defied Trump and why finishing the UAE's position in Yemen through Saudi bilateral management matters more than accepting the American document's provisions. Not because Saudi Arabia wants to eliminate UAE influence in Yemen, because the bilateral management of UAE influence in Yemen through the Saudi-UAE letter framework serves both countries' interests better than the American-mediated joint supervision and guarantee mechanisms that the refused document offered. The WhatsApp message from Abu Dhabi reached Shabwa before the formal refusal. The STC commander repositioned equipment. The informal network operated in the 6-hour window. That the quick refusal compressed. The document was operationally defeated before it was formally refused. And the Yemen that emerges from the defeat will be organized on the bilateral Saudi-UAE terms that neither the STC commander's repositioning nor the Trump 7-minute call could change. MBS defied Trump. The STC repositioned through UAE informal coordination. Both serve the same underlying interest. The bilateral accommodation that the letter framework established is the operative architecture. And the American document that offered American-mediated mechanisms in place of bilateral accommodation never had a realistic chance of surviving the specific operational and diplomatic defeat that the informal network and the 5-hour refusal produced together. The WhatsApp message from Abu Dhabi to Shabwa is the real story of why MBS refused Trump's Yemen deal, not the diplomatic provisions. The operational reality that the informal network created in the 6 hours between notification and refusal. Yemen's governance will be built on what that operational reality and the bilateral framework behind it can sustain, not on what an American document can guarantee. Let us now examine the broader implications of how Yemen's ceasefire documents die before formal rejection and what the specific operational sequence of the American document's defeat reveals about the real mechanics of conflict management in the Gulf theater. International diplomacy operates on a specific assumption about how ceasefire documents work. The assumption is that political leaders decide to accept or reject documents and that the operational situation reflects the political decision. Political acceptance means operational compliance. Political rejection means operational rejection. The decision-making flows from the political to the operational. Yemen's ceasefire document defeat reveals that this assumption understates how the operational proceeds and shapes the political in active conflict environments. The WhatsApp notification network operating before the formal refusal. The STC repositioning before the freeze confirmation. The informal UAE coordination channels operating in the gap between notification and decision. These operational processes are not following the political decision. They are shaping the operational reality that the political decision then formalizes. By the time MBS formally refused the document at 3 p.m, the operational reality that the document was designed to freeze had already been modified by the 6 hours of informal network activity that the morning notifications had triggered. The formal refusal came after the operational defeat rather than before it. This sequencing operational defeat before political rejection is the specific Yemen dynamic that makes the conflict's management through standard diplomatic documents so difficult. Every ceasefire document that is circulated informally before formal decision creates the specific window in which actors whose interests the document threatens can modify the operational reality that the document would formalize. The informal circulation of the American document, which began with UAE advisors learning about the document's provisions through their Washington connections and immediately beginning to route the information to STC field commanders, is not an accident of poor diplomatic tradecraft. It is the specific consequence of a conflict environment in which multiple actors have the intelligence connections to access information about diplomatic proposals before those proposals reach formal decision stages. Saudi Arabia's intelligence services knew the document was being prepared before the envoy departed Washington. The UAE's intelligence services knew its specific provisions before the envoy landed in Riyadh. The STC's informal network knew the provisions were potentially adverse before the envoy presented the document at 9 a.m. The document's formal diplomatic journey, from envoy's landing to Saudi reception to formal refusal, took 7 hours. The document's operational journey through the informal intelligence and coordination networks produced consequences in 6 of those 7 hours that shaped the formal refusal's operational environment. This is the specific intelligence operational diplomatic sequence that Yemen's conflict management has developed as its characteristic pattern. Intelligence about diplomatic proposals reaches operational actors before formal diplomatic process is complete. Operational actors respond to intelligence before political decisions are made. Political decisions then formalize operational realities that have already been shaped by the response to intelligence about the proposals. Understanding this pattern is essential to understanding why American diplomatic investment in Yemen ceasefire documents has consistently failed to produce durable operational outcomes. The documents formalize political commitments that operational actors have already begun routing around through the informal coordination networks that real influence in Yemen's conflict runs through. The specific American diplomatic approach that has consistently failed is designing documents that require operational compliance from actors whose operational behavior is coordinated through channels that the documents cannot reach. The STC commander in Shabwa is not a party to the formal diplomatic process. The WhatsApp message from Abu Dhabi that reached him before the formal decision is not a diplomatic channel. But both the commander and the message determine what the document's operational implementation would actually look like if the document were accepted. Diplomatic documents that are designed without accounting for the informal networks through which operational actors respond to diplomatic proposals produce the specific sequencing failure that the American Yemen document produced. The document was designed for a world in which political decisions precede and determine operational reality. Yemen operates in a world in which operational actors respond to intelligence about political proposals before political decisions are made. MBS understood this sequencing. His 5-hour refusal was partly designed to limit the window in which the informal network's operational response could accumulate. The Trump 7-minute call was too short to reverse the refusal. And the specific operational reality that the 6 hours of informal network activity had produced was already embedded in the field positions that the commander's repositioning order had created. The specific lesson for American Yemen diplomacy is the operational precedes the political lesson. Ceasefire documents that are designed without engaging the informal coordination networks that shape operational behavior before formal political decisions are made will continue to be defeated operationally before they are refused politically. The alternative diplomatic approach is to engage the informal networks before designing the formal documents. Understanding what UAE informal coordination with STC field commanders is producing, understanding what Saudi operational commands are advancing through the air campaign, understanding what the operational reality will look like when the formal document reaches decision stage, and designing the document around the operational reality that the informal networks are producing rather than around the political commitments. That standard diplomatic process assumes can be extracted from political leaders without engaging the operational actors who will implement or undermine those commitments. American diplomacy in Yemen has not yet developed this operational engagement approach. The document that the envoy presented at 9 a.m. was designed in Washington without the specific operational intelligence about informal UAE STC coordination that would have revealed the document's defeat before it was presented. MBS knew what his refusal would accomplish operationally because Saudi intelligence was tracking the informal network's response to the document's informal circulation. The 5-hour refusal compressed the informal network's operating window. The formal refusal ended the document before additional rounds of informal coordination could produce additional operational facts. This is how MBS defied Trump on Yemen, not simply by refusing provisions that were diplomatically unacceptable, by understanding the operational sequence, in which diplomatic defeat precedes formal rejection and managing the formal rejection's timing to limit the operational consequences that the informal network's activity in the window before formal rejection was producing. The WhatsApp message reached Shabwa. The STC commander repositioned. The formal refusal came at 3. Trump called at 6, 7 minutes. MBS did not change, and the Yemen ceasefire was defeated operationally before it was refused diplomatically, which is the specific sequence that Yemen's conflict management has been producing for every diplomatic initiative that has not accounted for how the informal networks that shape operational behavior work before formal decisions are made. That is the real story of MBS defying Trump on Yemen, not the diplomatic provisions, the operational sequence, and the specific informal network from Abu Dhabi to Shabwa that made the defeat operational before the refusal made it official. The final dimension of this story is what the operational defeat of the American document before its formal rejection means for the Islamabad ceasefire process and for the specific architecture that the comprehensive Yemen component needs to be built around. Pakistani mediators in Islamabad who are working on the Yemen dimension of the comprehensive settlement have been watching the American document's operational defeat with this specific analytical attention that reveals the most important design principle for the Yemen component they are building. The design principle is this: any Yemen governance framework that reaches implementation stage must already be embedded in the informal coordination networks that determine operational behavior before formal decisions are made. The framework cannot be designed in Washington or Islamabad and then presented to the informal networks for compliance. It must be developed through the informal networks so that when it reaches formal decision stage, it is already operating in the operational reality that the informal networks have produced. Pakistani mediation's specific approach to the Yemen component incorporates this principle through direct engagement with both the Saudi formal command structure and the UAE informal coordination network. Pakistani intelligence connections to UAE intelligence and to the STC's broader political network give Pakistani mediation access to the informal channel that the American diplomatic approach did not engage. The Yemen framework language that Pakistani mediation is developing is therefore not being designed in an Islamabad meeting room and then sent to Riyadh for Saudi review. It is being shaped through the specific conversations that Pakistani intelligence and diplomatic channels are conducting simultaneously with Saudi formal channels and UAE informal channels in ways that produce language that both the formal Saudi command structure and the informal UAE STC coordination network can operate within when the formal decision stage is reached. This is the specific diplomatic sophistication that successful Yemen framework design requires, not the standard diplomatic process of designing a document and presenting it for political decision. The operational network engagement process of developing language through the informal networks that shape operational behavior so that the language reflects operational reality before it is formalized as political commitment. MBS refused Trump's document because the document was designed without engaging the informal networks. Pakistan's Yemen framework component is being designed through the informal networks. The difference in design process is the difference between a document that is operationally defeated before formal rejection and a framework that is operationally embedded before formal acceptance. The STC commander in Shabwa, who repositioned equipment in response to a WhatsApp message, is the specific operational actor whose behavior any Yemen framework must account for. Pakistan's mediation is accounting for him. America's document did not. That is the specific difference that determines which framework Yemen will ultimately be governed by. WhatsApp message from Abu Dhabi. Equipment repositioning in Shabwa. Saudi formal refusal at 3 in the afternoon. Trump call at 6. 7 minutes, no change. And a Pakistani-Yemen framework that is being built through the informal networks that the American documents defeat, revealed as the actual operating system of Yemen's conflict management. MBS defied Trump. The informal network defeated the American document before the formal refusal made it official. And the Yemen ceasefire will be built by whoever designs their framework through the informal networks rather than for the political leaders whose formal decisions follow operational realities that the informal networks have already determined. The specific actors who operated in the informal network's 6-hour window are each rational within their specific roles. The UAE advisor who sent the notification was executing a UAE policy function. The STC commander who repositioned was protecting his force's survival. The Saudi intelligence officer tracking the network's response was providing the real-time analysis that informed the refusal's timing. All rational. All operating in the real system rather than the formal system. A Yemen framework that treats the formal diplomatic channels as the decision-making architecture and designs for formal political acceptance without engaging. The informal network will be defeated by the informal network before formal acceptance can translate into operational compliance. This is the specific lesson that the American documents defeat teaches. A Yemen framework that engages the informal network as the primary design input and treats formal political acceptance as the ratification of what the informal network has already shaped will produce operational compliance, because the operational actors whose behavior determines compliance have already shaped the framework's content. Pakistani mediation's specific value in Yemen framework design is Pakistan's access to both the formal channels that Saudi Arabia's command structure uses and the informal channels that UAE STC coordination uses. This dual access gives Pakistani mediation the specific capability to design frameworks that the informal network will operate within rather than route around. The American document was routed around in 6 hours. The Pakistani framework is being built to be embedded in rather than routed around. The difference is the design approach. The design approach is the specific thing that MBS's defiance of Trump's document teaches about what Yemen's governance framework requires to work. Trump sent a document. MBS refused it in 5 hours. Trump called in 7 minutes. No change. The informal network had already defeated the document operationally, and the Pakistani-Yemen framework being built through the informal networks is the specific alternative that the American document's operational defeat made necessary, and that the informal network's actual operating logic makes possible. That is the full story of MBS defying Trump on Yemen, from the WhatsApp message in Shabwa to the 7-minute presidential call in Riyadh. The informal network is the real operating system. The formal diplomatic document was defeated by the real operating system before it was refused by the formal one. And the framework that works will be the one built through the real operating system rather than designed for the formal one. The formal diplomatic system and the informal operating system exist simultaneously in Yemen. American diplomacy engages the formal system and designs documents for formal political acceptance. The informal system routes around formal documents before they reach formal decision. MBS's refusal was both formal rejection in the formal system and the specific action that compressed the informal system's operating window. Both systems matter. The formal system produces the headlines, the informal system produces the outcomes, and the framework that governs Yemen will be the one the informal system embeds before the formal system ratifies it. That is what MBS understood. The real system had already spoken through the WhatsApp to Shabwa. The formal refusal was the formal system catching up.